Hello, sophomore. So we are going to continue our notes from before. I'm also going to tell you when, at a certain point, there'll be a link to a crash course video that you'll watch. Um, I'm putting up both assignments today, but these are for the whole week. So you can take your time through the rest of this week to complete this. So we did Federalist 10. Now we're going to do Federalist 51. So you should be able to describe checks and balances by the end of this. So Federalist 51 discusses that the Constitution would allow for separation of powers, okay? That each branch of the government should have its own powers and that they should check on each other. In order for the government to survive, there should be a structure that would be such that the power to control the citizenry, it must be to control itself. Unbridled power by individuals or governments itself is to be feared. So ultimately, you don't want the government to have too much power. You see protests right now. People feel that the government is overreaching with the stay-at-home orders, and some people in other states are protesting. Now you can feel one way or the other. I don't necessarily agree with the protests, but they certainly have a right to protest under the Constitution, and they certainly have the right to feel that there's an overreach. So Federalist 51, at both the national and state level, power is given to each of the three branches. So the executive branch at the federal level, that's the presidency and the cabinet. Legislative, and by the way, at the state level, it's the governor. Governor Baker is our executive. The legislative, that is the Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate, or there's also a House of Representatives in the Senate and the state house, and the judicial is the Supreme Court and all the circuit courts in the federal government, and in the state government there is also a Supreme Court. Each department is to act as a check on the others. So how does it work? So this is where you would take a pause and check out the checks and balances video. I will put a link in the Google Classroom that you can click on, or you can do it at the very end. All right, so what you see here, that is the legislature, which is the Congress, okay? So there's two branches of the Congress. It's hard to see, but that says the Senate, and then there's the House, and they're in those irrespective parts of the Capitol building. Then there's the executive, which is the presidency, okay? And that's the seal of the president. Then there is the judicial, there's the Supreme Court seal, okay? So the executive and the legislative have checks on each other. So legislative checks on the executive. They confirm executive appointments. Like you saw a couple years ago, there was Brett Kavanaugh was appointed to the Supreme Court. That was approved by the Senate. All the cabinet members, when Trump was elected, were approved by the Senate. Ratified treaties. Now, if we have a treaty with a foreign country, it has to be ratified by the Congress, specifically the Senate. Appropriate money, okay? The power of the purse goes to the legislative branch, and they give the executive the amount of money they have, okay? And they can override a president's veto, okay, with a 2/3 majority, and they can impeach or remove the president, okay? And we saw that also this year. Actually, yeah, it was this year. We saw the president be impeached by the House of Representatives, but not removed by the Senate. Okay, so the judicial branch, okay, legislative checks on the judicial, okay, they create lower federal courts, they can impeach and remove judges, just like Trump was impeached, not removed. Approve appointments of federal judges. I just mentioned that Brett Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch, most recent ones, and can propose amendments to overrule judicial decisions. Okay, so if there's a judicial decision, for instance, there's the gay marriage decision, there's Roe v. Wade. Those are two of the more controversial ones, and the legislative branch could propose an amendment to the Constitution to override those decisions. Okay, this is getting very busy. Okay, legislative. Okay, so the executive branch. Okay, the executive branch has checks on the legislative. Okay, they can the White House can propose laws. They can veto laws. They can make appointments. They can appeal to the people. They can call for special sessions of Congress. They can also pass what are known as executive orders. That's another way that the executive has control over the legislative lawmakers and stuff. The executive checks on the judicial. They appoint the federal judges. Trump appointed Gorsuch and Kavanaugh. Both Supreme Court justices and federal court judges are appointed by Trump. Trump actually, the president, but currently the Trump administration. And Trump has appointed a ton of judges, okay? All right, so now we move on to the Supreme Court. There's the Constitution itself. There's the Supreme Court building. It's right across the street from the Capitol building. And so there checks on the legislative and the presidency or the executive. Okay, so checks on the executive. Okay, judicial checks on the executive branch. They can declare executive actions or executive orders as unconstitutional. On the legislative, judicial checks on the legislative, they can declare acts of Congress unconstitutional. Same thing. All right. So they basically can nullify any laws that they need to. Okay. So the system of checks and balances. This is another way to explain it. Basically, the executive branch can approve pardons and appoint judges to fill vacancies in the court for the judicial branch, but then if you follow it back up, they can interpret the presidential actions as unconstitutional, and they can also, all the judges are appointed for life. So once you get appointed, you really don't have to suck up to the president anymore. Okay. So if we were in class, we'd do this pair share thing, explain how separation of separated powers and checks and balances protect individual rights. At the same time, there is a Google Doc. I will post this question in there. You just need to answer it. Okay. So just based on kind of what we went. You don't have to pair and share, just write 1 or 2 sentences and you should be good. So you can do this at the end. You'll see the Google Doc. Addition of the Bill of Rights. The Anti-Federalists argued that there needed to be a Bill of Rights. It would be added in 1789, 2 years after the Constitution was ratified. The Bill of Rights, which is the first 10 amendments, protects the rights against tyranny of the majority. Okay, so in Federalist 51, they say that they will add a Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights limits the powers of the federal government and state governments. Okay, there's another clip of the Bill of Rights. I will also post this. You can watch this at your leisure. Okay, there's a cartoon here on the Bill of Rights. We're going to kind of skip that. These are all the different amendments in cartoon form. We'll do that at another time. And that is it. You only answer these following questions, also in the Google Doc. How does Madison argue that a strong, because Madison also wrote 51, argue that a strong central government established by the Constitution assures the preserved liberty? How does the organization of the branches of government reflect Madison's view of human nature? That's question 1. Question 2, what is Madison's concern regarding the rights of the minority in the U.S.? How does he predict that the nature and composition of the American Republic will prevent the rights of the majority from being threatened?